I and my husband Derek have been married for 12 years, and something happened recently that has me questioning everything about our relationship. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. As a veterinary surgeon, I've dealt with delivering bad news to others, but being on the receiving end was different. When I first got the diagnosis, Derek seemed supportive. He held my hand during that initial appointment, nodded along to everything the oncologist said, and drove me home after. But looking back, there were signs that something was off. Every time I mentioned the mastectomy and reconstruction that my doctors strongly recommended, Derek would ask if it was really necessary or if there were less invasive options. We also have the complicated situation of my father living with us. He has early onset Alzheimer's and needs significant care. I've been his primary caregiver for the past 3 years, despite working full-time as a vet surgeon. When my diagnosis came, I immediately worried about how we'd manage his care during my recovery, but Derek kept brushing it off with, "We'll figure it out," whenever I tried to make concrete plans. My sister has been amazing through all this, offering to help with our dad and checking in on me constantly. She even took 2 weeks off work to help during my recovery. Fast forward to the surgery day. Derek drove me to the hospital at 5:30 a.m. for my 7 a.m. procedure. He kissed me on the forehead, promised he'd be there when I woke up, and said he was going to get coffee while I went through pre-op. The nurse commented on what a supportive husband I had. I woke up in recovery around 1 p.m., immediately asking for Derek. The recovery nurse looked uncomfortable and said they'd been trying to reach him for the past 4 hours. Apparently, the surgeon had found something during the procedure that he wanted to discuss with both of us, but Derek was nowhere to be found. No answer on his cell. Nothing. I checked my phone and saw 0 missed calls or texts from Derek explaining where he was. Just messages from colleagues offering help with my dad and wishing me well. I was alone, post-mastectomy, confused and starting to panic. Around 3 p.m., a social worker came by to ask if I needed help arranging transportation home since my emergency contact wasn't responding. I was completely on my own for this. I called my sister, who was at our house caring for Dad, and she was shocked Derek wasn't there. She couldn't leave Dad alone but promised to figure something out. Derek finally showed up at 7 p.m., 6 hours after my surgery ended. When I asked where he'd been during the day, he casually mentioned he needed to clear his head and had gone to a sports bar to watch the game. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband had abandoned me during cancer surgery to watch sports and drink beer. And the worst part? He seemed confused by my tears. He held up the roses and said he figured I'd be out of it anyway for most of the time. So what did it matter? The surgeon came in while I was still trying to process this betrayal and wanted to discuss some concerning findings from pathology that meant we needed to consider additional treatment. Derek actually stepped out to take a phone call during this conversation, missing the entire thing. When I refused the roses and told Derek he had completely failed me when I needed him most, he had the audacity to tell me I was being ungrateful and dramatic because of the medications. I was too exhausted and in too much pain to argue, but I heard him later that evening on the phone telling someone that I was being a total bitch about him taking one afternoon for himself after all the stress she'd put him through. Put him through? I'm the one with cancer. A nurse came in to check my vitals and saw me crying. Derek explained to her that cancer patients get emotional and that I didn't really mean what I was saying. He was actually gaslighting me to medical professionals. It's been 2 weeks since surgery now. I'm home recovering, with my sister helping as much as possible with Dad. Derek is acting like nothing happened, literally going about his daily routine as if he didn't abandon his wife during cancer surgery. He even suggested we move past it because I need to focus on healing, not dwelling on negative stuff. I've noticed other things too since I've been home. Derek disappears for hours without explanation. He's been evasive about our finances when I've asked about medical bills, and I've caught him in several small lies about where he's been or who he's talked to. Edit. A lot of you asked about my father's care during all this. My sister has been a godsend, staying with us most days while I recover. Dad's disease has progressed to the point where he sometimes doesn't recognize me, which means he hasn't fully registered what's happening with my health. Derek barely interacts with him anyway, so that dynamic hasn't changed much. I feel like I'm going crazy. Is abandoning your spouse during cancer surgery normal, or am I missing something? I keep trying to understand how someone could do this to a person they supposedly love, especially during what's literally the most vulnerable moment of my life. I don't even recognize the man I married anymore. Now for the first update. First, thank you all for the overwhelming support on my original post about my husband abandoning me during cancer surgery. I'm still trying to process both your comments and what's happening in my marriage right now. Honestly, didn't expect thousands of replies. It's been 2 weeks since my mastectomy now, and physically, I'm healing as expected, though emotionally, I'm in a whole different place. My sister has been staying at our house most days to help with Dad while I recover. Derek, on the other hand, well, that's what this update is about. Remember how I mentioned in my original post that Derek has been disappearing for hours without explanation? I've discovered he's been lying about taking time off work to care for me. According to his boss, he's been using sick days, but definitely not spending them at home. So where has he been going all this time while my sister takes care of Dad and me? This is the question that's been keeping me up at night. My veterinary clinic has been incredibly supportive through everything. Seriously, I couldn't ask for better colleagues. They've extended my medical leave and arranged coverage for all my scheduled surgeries. I'm beyond grateful, but also worried about the financial impact since I'm the primary breadwinner in our household. When I tried to discuss finances with Derek last week, he got weirdly defensive and changed the subject every single time. For those who asked about healthcare coverage, yes, I have decent insurance through my practice, but there are still significant out-of-pocket costs for my treatment. The financial stress is just another layer. Yesterday, something happened that finally pushed me to confront Derek directly. I got a call from our pharmacy about an insurance issue with his prescription. This caught me completely off guard because, as far as I knew, Derek wasn't on any medication. In 12 years of marriage, he's never mentioned needing prescription meds for anything beyond the occasional antibiotic. So last night during dinner, which he actually showed up for, shocking I know, I decided to casually bring it up, thinking maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding. I waited until we were both sitting down with food and carefully asked about the pharmacy call. The change in his demeanor was immediate and disturbing. His face hardened as he set down his fork and stared at me. "Are you spying on me now?" Not even a question, just a flat accusation. I explained that the pharmacy called our home number, not that I was snooping. Derek immediately claimed I was making the whole thing up and suggested my cancer meds were making me paranoid. Yes, he actually said that. And no, this isn't the first time he's tried to gaslight me about something I know happened. What really struck me was watching his entire demeanor change before my eyes. His hands started shaking, and he became defensive in a way I've honestly never seen before. When I asked where he's been during his supposed work hours, he stood up so abruptly he knocked over his water glass, shouting that he couldn't deal with this interrogation. Then came the part where I was watching my husband's behavior change. He started pacing our kitchen, ranting about how I had no idea how hard things had been for him, dealing with my cancer, my father, and everything else while working full-time. He acted as though I chose to get cancer to inconvenience him. And let's not forget, I've been my dad's primary caregiver for years while working full-time as a surgeon. I just sat there, completely stunned. For the first time, I noticed his bloodshot eyes and slight slurring of words, despite having only one beer with dinner. When I suggested as calmly as possible that maybe he was struggling with something he hadn't shared with me, he grabbed his keys and wallet, mumbling that he needed to get some air. After he stormed out, I found myself doing something I've never done before, searching his pockets. In his discarded pants on the bathroom floor, I found a receipt from a bar clear across town. It was time-stamped during hours he claimed to be at work, with charges for 4 whiskeys and a cash advance of $200. Something compelled me to look further. In our garage, I found his golf bag, which he hasn't used in months since work has been so busy. Hidden inside were several pill bottles, oxycodone prescribed by 3 different doctors, all under slightly different variations of his name, Derek J. Smith, D. John Smith, etc. I spent the entire night researching substance abuse and addiction. So many behavioral changes I dismissed over the past year suddenly made sense. The mood swings, financial secretiveness, increasing self-centeredness. I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner, but I guess that's what happens when you trust someone completely. When Derek finally returned home at 3 a.m., I pretended to be asleep. I realized I needed to make careful plans rather than confront him impulsively about what I'd found. Now, I'm trying to figure out my next steps while dealing with cancer recovery, caring for my dad, and discovering my husband has apparently been hiding an addiction. Edit. A lot of you asked about the prescription that started this whole revelation. It was for Xanax, which Derek has never mentioned needing or taking before. The pharmacy tech mentioned they were having insurance issues because it was filled too soon after the last one, which suggests he's been taking them faster than prescribed. This was what initially confused me, since anxiety medication wasn't something Derek had ever discussed with me. The thing that's killing me is that I'm a medical professional. I deal with medications and their effects every day in my practice. How did I miss the signs that my own husband was struggling with addiction? I keep going over everything in my head, all the little moments that didn't quite add up, wondering if I was just too focused on my own health crisis and Dad's care to see what was happening right in front of me. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. I'm meeting with a counselor tomorrow to talk through my options. Thank you to everyone who suggested this. My sister knows something is wrong, but not the full extent yet. I'm trying to protect her from taking on even more emotional burden while she's already helping so much with Dad. For now, I'm documenting everything and making copies of financial statements while I figure out what to do. Derek's behavior during my surgery wasn't a one-off event. It was part of a pattern I can now see clearly. I need to protect myself and my father, especially since my cancer treatment is far from over. Thank you again for all your support and advice. Yes, even the "divorce him immediately" comments that seemed extreme at first but make more sense now. I never thought I'd be dealing with cancer and addiction issues simultaneously, but here we are. I'll update again when I have more clarity on my next steps. Now for the second update. Update 2. It's been 3 days since I discovered Derek's hidden pill bottles, and I want to thank everyone for the incredible support and advice. Seriously, over 300 comments with actual helpful suggestions instead of just "divorce him." For those who missed it, my last post explained how my husband abandoned me during cancer surgery, and I've since discovered he's been hiding what appears to be an addiction. These past few days, I've been documenting everything while researching addiction resources, thanks to everyone who sent links. I've learned more about our financial situation, and it's worse than I imagined. Our joint savings account has been nearly depleted, with mysterious withdrawals of $50 to $200 happening several times weekly over the past few months. Looking back through statements, I can see this pattern started around the same time Derek's behavior began changing, but I was too preoccupied with my diagnosis to notice. My oncologist called yesterday to recommend starting chemotherapy soon, which is adding another layer of stress. The realization that I can't rely on Derek during chemo while also caring for my dad is hitting hard. I always imagined my husband would be my support through something like cancer, but now I'm planning for treatment without his support. Yesterday, my sister mentioned that Derek had borrowed $5,000 from her for a work investment about 2 months ago. This was the first I'd heard of any loan or investment. Apparently, Derek told her not to mention it while I was dealing with cancer. She assumed he'd told me by now, but he definitely had not. When Derek came home last night around 11 p.m., I noticed something was off. He was unusually talkative and energetic, pacing around the kitchen and talking about random topics. His pupils were pinpoints despite the dim lighting. After doing research on addiction, the signs were obvious. He was high on something. I waited until he settled down a bit before bringing up our financial situation. I tried to frame it as planning for treatment costs rather than an accusation. His demeanor changed instantly. He became defensive, insisting our finances were fine and that I needed to focus on recovery instead of obsessing over money during cancer. I watched his behavior as he paced our living room, alternating between defensive and attempts to convince me to drop the subject. 1 minute he'd snap at me, the next he'd be holding my hand and telling me everything would be fine. When I specifically asked about the depleted savings account, he froze before claiming he'd invested the money in a sure thing through a colleague that would solve all our problems. As I pressed for details, he struggled to maintain his story, contradicting himself multiple times. First it was stocks, then a friend's business, then some vague opportunity. The conversation reached a breaking point when I mentioned my sister's loan. Derek became angry and suddenly punched the wall next to him, causing damage as he shouted that everyone was ganging up on him and looking for reasons to paint him as the bad guy. The noise woke my dad, who appeared confused and frightened. Seeing my father's fear seemed to momentarily break through Derek's rage. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left the house, cursing under his breath. After getting my dad back to bed, I returned to find Derek's phone on the coffee table. I felt justified in checking it. The notifications on his lock screen already told me enough. Text messages from someone named Mike about payment overdue and last chance before consequences. I knew his passcode, our anniversary date, and found numerous calls to various medical offices, confirming my suspicions about doctor shopping for prescriptions. A calendar entry for a meeting with someone labeled recovery options that he'd missed 3 times was also there. So, he's been aware of his problem and possibly tried to get help, but couldn't follow through. I spent the night securing important documents, making copies of financial records, and calling my sister to create a contingency plan for my dad's care. By morning, Derek still hadn't returned home, but he sent a text saying he was sorting things out and would explain everything soon. The first acknowledgement that there might be truth to my concerns. Edit. Quick update. My sister just called. Derek showed up at her house an hour ago, asking for another loan. When she refused, he became agitated and accused her of turning me against him. She asked him to leave, but he wouldn't go until her husband came home and threatened to call the police. I'm now staying at a hotel with my dad tonight until I can figure out next steps. I've frozen our joint credit card and transferred what little remains in our checking account to a new account only in my name, following advice from many of you. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with a financial advisor recommended by my clinic's social worker. Between cancer, my dad's Alzheimer's, and now this addiction nightmare, I feel completely overwhelmed and alone. Part of me still loves the man I married, but I'm starting to accept that person might not exist anymore, if he ever did at all. Now for the final update. Final update. My husband abandoned me during cancer surgery, and I found out he has a pill addiction. Things have gotten intense. First off, thanks to everyone who's followed this whole mess and offered support through what's been the hardest time of my life. It's been about 2 weeks since my last update, and I wanted to give you all the closure you deserve after sticking with me through all this. Those 2 weeks have been very busy. I started chemotherapy last week, which has been very difficult. I've already noticed changes in my appearance. Meanwhile, I've been meeting with a divorce attorney who discovered something that floored me. Derek had taken out multiple credit cards in our joint names with nearly $45,000 in debt I knew absolutely nothing about. Yeah, you read that right, $45,000. The attorney thinks he's been using cash advances to fund his habit, which explains where all our money has been going. Derek came home briefly about a week ago. He admitted to having some issues with pain pills, but massively downplayed everything. According to him, he just got a little dependent after a back injury, and things got slightly out of hand. When I showed him our empty savings account statements, he just shrugged and said he'd pay it all back soon, with some vague promise about overtime at work, the same work he's been skipping to get high. His family initially called me nonstop, pressuring me to stand by my husband during his time of need and honor my wedding vows in sickness and health. His mom even had the nerve to tell me addiction is a disease and I should be more compassionate. That all changed when I finally got fed up and sent them detailed evidence, screenshots of the empty accounts, copies of the hidden credit card statements, photos of all the pill bottles, and a timeline of his behavior, including abandoning me during surgery. Radio silence from them after that. I've worked out a system for my dad's care during all this. My sister arranged for him to stay with her on my treatment days, and one of my colleagues organized a meal train and driving schedule to help me get to medical appointments. The support from my coworkers at the vet clinic has kept me going. Yesterday was my second chemo session, and I was feeling rough from the start. The nurse hooked up my IV, and I saw Derek walking into the treatment area. He seemed sober for the first time in months. I felt a mix of anger and nostalgia. My oncology nurse immediately positioned herself between us. She politely but firmly told Derek that family visits needed to be coordinated with the front desk first. Derek smiled and said he just wanted to make things right and be there for me this time. It was similar to how he'd approached things after disappointing me. I told him I wasn't interested in having this conversation during my treatment. He responded differently. He said, "Give me 5 minutes after everything I've been through," loud enough that several other patients turned to look. My divorce papers were sticking out of my bag on the chair beside me. Derek noticed them and grabbed the folder before I could stop him. As he scanned the documents, his face changed. He threw them down and started accusing me of kicking him when he's down and abandoning their marriage over one mistake. I stayed calm. I pointed out that his absence during my cancer surgery wasn't just one mistake, but the moment that opened my eyes to years of selfish behavior and deception. His voice got louder, and I saw the nurse press a button on the wall that I later learned was a security call. Then Derek leaned in and said, "I would regret this because no one would want me with one breast and no hair." I wish I could say I had a perfect comeback, but I just sat there. Before I could respond, 2 security guards appeared and escorted Derek out as he yelled about all he had sacrificed for me. The other patients and staff just watched as my husband was escorted out of a cancer treatment center while verbally abusing someone undergoing chemotherapy. After he left, I broke down. The nurse helped me through the panic attack that followed while my oncologist came to check on me. She immediately connected me with the hospital's patient advocate, who helped me secure an emergency restraining order based on Derek's threatening behavior in a medical setting. When Derek was served with the restraining order the next day, I received many texts, tearful apologies, accusations that I was ruining his reputation, claims that I was using cancer to punish him, and threats about what would happen when I was broke and alone. I forwarded everything to my attorney before blocking his number completely. My sister's husband and friends from work came over that afternoon to help change the locks on our house and install security cameras. The part I find most surprising is how much lighter I feel. Even with cancer and chemo making me sick, even with my dad's condition getting worse, I feel like I can breathe again for the first time in months. Living with Derek's addiction and lies was emotionally draining me until they were gone. I'm focusing on my health and rebuilding my life now. My prognosis is actually good. Stage 2 is very treatable, and the surgery was successful. I've moved my dad back home with me now that the house is secure, and having him is comforting. My sister comes by daily to help, and we've hired a part-time caregiver using the money I would have been spending on Derek's addiction. Edit. A few updates since I started writing this post. I got a call from Derek's boss yesterday. Apparently, Derek hasn't shown up for work in 3 days and isn't answering his phone. I explained the situation and gave him my attorney's number. Also, the preliminary credit report my lawyer ordered showed Derek tried to take out another loan last week, but was denied. His mother texted me this morning apologizing for not seeing the signs of his addiction sooner. She asked to visit me and my dad sometime, which I'm still thinking about. I never thought my marriage would end during cancer treatment, but life rarely goes according to plan. Thank you all for your support through this nightmare. Your advice literally helped me escape a situation that was becoming dangerous.